welcome to WaypointsGO. It's great to be here with you and to be able to look at God's Word. And so as we continue the story that we began last week, this is a kind of a flashback of when John the Baptist was beheaded by Herod. And we talked a little bit last week just about what this means in our own lives, and that following Christ and serving God doesn't always have the outcomes that you might expect. In this story, that could not be more true in this story, because the outcome for John the Baptist, at least on earth, is not ideal. But we continue the story in Mark chapter 6, verse 21 through 29. And so I'm just going to spend a minute or two reading these verses for us. It says, Herodias' chance finally came at Herod's birthday. He gave a party for his high government officials, army officers, and the leading citizens of Galilee. Then his daughter, also named Herodias, came in and performed a dance that greatly pleased Herod and his guests. Ask me anything you'd like, the king said to the girl, and I will give it to you. He even vowed, I will give you whatever you ask, up to half of my kingdom. She went out and asked her mother, what should I ask for? Her mother told her, ask for the head of John the Baptist. So the girl hurried back to the king and told him, I want the head of John the Baptist right now on a tray. Then the king deeply regretted what he had said, but because of his vows that he had made in front of his guests, he could not refuse her. So he immediately sent an executioner to the prison to cut off John's head and bring it to him. The soldier beheaded John the Baptist, brought his head on a tray, and gave it to the girl, who took it to her mother. When John's disciples heard what had happened, they came to get the body, and they buried it in a tomb. So this week, we're going to unpack, what do these verses mean? What do they mean to us this week, today, in our everyday life? So please join us. I'm glad you're here with us at Waypoints.
Well, thank you so much, Ryan. We kind of began our conversation last week, really talking about John the Baptist and his beheading. Well, today we kind of get to the heart of it and the finality of it. And it's such an interesting passage. And I want to make sure that you and I are on the same page and really understanding what's at the heart of John losing his head. What is going on historically, what's going on behind the scenes. And so let me kind of fill you in on the story. So anytime we see Herod throughout the scriptures, you and I think, immediately jump to the first Herod, which is Herod the Great. This is the Herod that was around when Jesus was born. Now, Herod the Great is not great because he did great things. He's great because he built great big stuff, and including the temple and a bunch of stuff. So, or at least the temple courtyard. And so he was known because of his ability to build things and make a huge impact. Well, Herod the Great had 5 wives and had multiple children among each of them. And Antipas is one of those guys, and he's the one that we're really talking about today. So let me give you just a little bit of the backstory of how John got arrested and what exactly is going on here. And it is truly a Jerry Springer sort of thing. So Matthew, Mark, and Luke all tell us that John gets thrown in prison because he stands up to this king, King Herod, King Antipas. And it is important for you and I to know the backstory. So here it is. So Antipas takes a road trip to Rome. And on the way, he stops and visits his half-brother, Philip. And while he is there, he takes a shinin'. He really falls in love with his brother Philip's wife, Herodias, who happens to also be Antipas's niece. All right, so Catch it, right? You can hear the banjos going already. So, if marrying your brother's wife, who also happens to be your niece, is not bad enough, you also need to understand that Antipas is also already married. In fact, he's been married for like 15 years. And so, Antipas, in order to be with Herodes, he actually plans on murdering his wife. Now, his current wife is the daughter of King Artus IV, who's of a neighboring country, and he had made this marriage as a political alliance. So once his current wife gets news that she's about to be murdered so that he can marry his brother's wife, who's his niece. See how this is Jerry Springer? She goes and she runs home to Dad, and Dad creates a little bit of a war, and all this military and revenge and just all of this crazy stuff. So John the Baptist, being a moral guy, John the Baptist being a guy who's in love with God, stands up publicly and says, "This is not okay. We should not be doing this." And he believes that it's a wrong. He believes it's a violation of God's law, and says, you know what, you should not be doing this. And John just does not stay quiet, and he begins to criticize the king very publicly, and he's risking his life by standing up for the right thing. And so Herod and then Antipas and Herodes, they are not happy with this at all, and she wants John dead. Now, Antipas doesn't kill him immediately. He actually goes and has him arrested, and that's what brings us to our verses for tonight. Now, John is taken to a fortress. It's the fortress of Makidus, which actually means sword in the Greek. And that's where our verses pick up tonight. And as Ryan read them for us, we have this situation happening. So our story continues, and it tells us that Herodes does this dance. And Mark makes sure to include some interesting language here. He says that that it was her dance performance, reading from the scripture, greatly pleased all the men. So this is probably not some PG sort of dance. It's absolutely PG-13 and maybe a little R-rated in there, right? And the men are greatly pleased by this dance, and Antipas is, and as a reward for this, he says, ask anything. He's just enthralled with her. Ask anything, and it will be yours. And Herodes has set this whole thing up. She knows exactly how to get to Antipas, and she's like, I want John the Baptist's head. He's the one who's publicly calling me out. He's the one who has been criticizing me. He's been criticizing you, and it is time. I want his head on a platter, silver platter, if that is true according to the rumors and all that other stuff, right? So she wants his head on a tray, and that's exactly what happens. Herod has John beheaded, and his head brought to her on a tray. She then takes that to her mother. They gloat, they celebrate, all of that. So that's our context for our story today. Just historically, how interesting it is when a person wants revenge. How interesting it is when a person wants payback. And that's exactly what's happening here. We got a good old-fashioned lust. We got good old-fashioned revenge. We got good old-fashioned sin. We've got all of these things happening in the midst of our story. Well, thank you so much for joining us for watching Waypoints Go. And we hope that it's making a difference in your spiritual journey. And if it is, would you think about partnering with us financially? See, Waypoints Go is a crowd-funded mission. It's a group of people who want to take the gospel and the truth of Jesus outside of the four walls of a church to take it on the go with us. And this content in which you're watching is only available by generous partners, people who come alongside and say, I believe in this mission. So if this is making a difference for you, if you believe in the mission in which we are doing, then we just ask you to partner with us financially. You'll find a link below in the description on how to go ahead and do that. So it seems very real to us that evil kind of wins here, right? That sin wins here. That we see a godly man stand up for a godly position, and then we see, at least from this perspective, that evil triumphs. And if you remember from last week, as we were talking about John almost having a crisis of faith, here I am doing the right thing, standing up for the right thing. And remember, I talked to you last week about Matthew chapter 11, where John sends his disciples and says to Jesus, "Are you the Messiah, or should we be looking for someone else?" And it's this real defining moment did I really do the right thing? And we have these crises in life, these moments where we really have to wrestle with that, because it seems, for at least from our human perspective, that evil wins. Does evil win in this situation? And if you remember, Jesus spoke back to John, or at least John's disciples, and said, "You tell John, blessed is the man who does not fall away from me." So what happens to us when things don't go the way that we wanted them to? What happens to our faith when things don't turn out, at least in this momentary moment, the way that we thought they would? Where do we place our hope? What do we do with that? That's an important question of faith, because we all have these moments. We all have these moments where we thought one thing, we wanted one thing, we prayed for one thing, and then they just didn't quite turn out the way we wanted. So what do we do with that? So Justin, take it and run with it.
Well, thanks, Todd. Now, ultimately, what do we do when things don't turn out the way we expected them to turn out? What are we supposed to do? Are we supposed to change? What is our spiritual reaction to these circumstances that are just never thought would happen to us? And I ask myself that question a lot, and I know you guys do too. That feeling that we know exactly what is going to happen, and we have such a strong belief that our life begins to shape around it, only to have the rug pulled out from underneath us. Now, that's a hard pill to swallow. We've all been there. I know that I've had situations that didn't turn out the way I thought they should turn out. Jobs that didn't work out, health issues that didn't take the path that I thought they would take, financial things that didn't come to fruition, and all those things caused a lot of stress. I worried over them before they would ever happen, and just went forward like they were going to happen, and I thought my bases were covered, and then I was surprised when I found out that things didn't turn out the way I had planned them to. Now, much like the disciples here of John's, they're waiting for John to be released from prison. And they're disappointed when that never happens. That John is locked, and in fact, John's disciples were more disappointed. I know that feeling. John, their leader, dies there in prison, and he's never released. So, does hope get misplaced? How would you answer that? Can we misplace our hope? If we place our hope in our bank account, it has a high chance of letting us down. If we place our hope in the stock market, it might just let us down. If we place our hope in the stock market, it will let us down, like I said. But if we place our hope in our own skills, because I know how to make things work, then we might be letting ourselves down. Hope placed in things that of this world, that will always let us down. When we put our hope in the things of this world, we will be returned disappointment, right? We will get disappointment out of those things. And it's a hard balance, because we know that God created us and He created these blessings that we enjoy today, but those blessings, those will eventually let us down if that's where we put our hope. Hope placed in anything other than God will always let us down. See, our spiritual growth is dependent on where we place our hope. God asks us to place our hope in Him. In fact, it says in Psalms 33, verse 20, we put our hope in the Lord. He is our shield. Wherever we put our hope, we are ultimately giving power over for our future. If we place our hope in the stock market, we are giving it power over our financial future. God knows this. And once we give our hope over to something, there's a chance that it misuses that power of the future and gives us pain in return. See, God's not going to misuse your hope. Hope that is placed in Him will never be returned in the future with pain. Hope that is placed in God is a renewed future. It's a natural human thing to feel disappointed when things don't turn out the way we had hoped they'd turn out. When life takes a turn you didn't expect, God has a future for you. And it may not be the one that you were planning, but there is a future. Now, my question then becomes, where have you placed your hope? Has it ever been returned with disappointment? Now, let's talk about a time where that has happened to you and what it's felt like. What did you learn about your spirituality through something like that? Let's talk about that.